Hey,
on
it looked like it worked.
for once.
Yeah.
Friday didn't hurt us.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's see. Pull it up on my iPad here. There it is.
Sweet. I'll wait just a minute or two, I guess.
Yeah. Got a couple people here. Thanks everybody for being with us. We appreciate it. I'll go ahead and say, since a couple people were asking, I was on the road this week, so Wednesday we weren't able to have our session. I was driving. Yesterday was the long day. We drove through 6 states yesterday in 16 hours, so I'm a little weary, but it's been good. I like the colors that you
Yeah.
put up on you there.
Now the screensaver. I'm in somebody else's bedroom because we're at somebody's house and this was the quiet place. But their TV was on and it was purple, but now it's like a scrolling screensaver. So I'm just gonna be lit up in different colors. So what 6 states was it? Probably Alabama, I guess.
Woke up in Tennessee.
Oh, okay.
Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota.
Okay.
I think that's right. So
Hard to remember what's
the day before was Florida, Georgia, Tennessee.
I think it's hard when you're going. I mean, I don't know which part of. I guess you went through like the skinny part of Kentucky, right?
Yeah.
I think whenever you go through, like this happens for us whenever we're driving like from the Northeast to the Southeast, just the psychological thing when you hit a state line, you're like, oh, sweet, we did something, we accomplished something. It's like when you're going from the Northeast down, it's like New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, you're just crushing it. And like in a 2-hour span, you go through 6 states and then you're in Virginia for like 39 hours or something like that. It's just terrible, you know, but that psychological thing of when you get those at the end of the trip, it's nice because you feel like you're hitting the finish line, but when it's at the beginning, it gets a little tiring.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's get going. Thanks everybody for being here. Ben, you want to remind us where we are?
Yeah, that sounds good. We're going to start reading in Philippians 2 and verse 19 in a few minutes, but we thought it'd be good to kind of pause to take a step back and think about what we've looked at for the past couple of weeks. Paul's in prison. By all accounts, this would be the worst kind of situation to be in. And yet this book is a book where not only is he expressing his own joy that he is carrying with him, he's also exhorting other people to have joy and to have the right kind of perspective so they can have joy. And so what we've noted is a lot of this has been about our mentality, our mindset. So chapter 1, Paul expressed his own, most of chapter 1 is pretty, I don't know if autobiographical is exactly the right word, but certainly internal for Paul. This is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm feeling. This is how I'm viewing my life. And I think the word we used was the idea of having a single mind or a singular focus. I just wanted to highlight a couple of verses. I don't know, you might have some other verses that are really important to highlight, but verse 21 to me seems like maybe the best summary of Paul's perspective. Maybe backing up into verse 20, where he says, "It's my earnest expectation and hope that I will not be put to shame in anything, but that with all boldness, Christ will even now, as always, be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain." That's the singular focus that Paul had, and he was exhorting them to have. The other verse to me is probably verse 27, where he exhorts them sort of, hey, here's how I've lived my life, how I have this singular focus on Christ. Verse 27, only conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or remain absent, I will hear that you're standing firm in one spirit, with one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel. And then he continues from there. But those are a pretty good summary to me, I think, of the main message of chapter 1. But I don't know, what else would you add onto that from the first chapter?
Nope, I think that's great. Paul is really inviting them into his situation that they already know about, but they're distressed about it. And he's showing them that that doesn't have to be the case, that there are ways to through your perspective, find joy, find ways to be productive, to bring glory to God. So that's right.
And I like with chapter 1, it's all about, hey, you need to think about God, think about Christ, think about the hope we have, think about the security we have. And he gets at this a little bit in chapter 1 already, but especially in chapter 2, he pivots that as far as, especially what you said about being productive. The productive thing for Paul is thinking about how he can serve others in Jesus' name. So at the
Yeah.
beginning of chapter 2, he exhorts them, okay, listen, it would make my joy complete if you guys would do nothing out of selfishness or conceit, but rather put each other's interests above your own, which is the same mentality that Jesus had. And so if to live as Christ really is our mantra, that means we're not only going to have a singular mindset, we're also going to have a selfless mentality, a selfless mindset. We're going to be servants. We're going to put others first above us. And we even looked at verses 12 to 18 last time. I guess that was Monday, talking about how in a lot of ways that's what working out our salvation is about serving God's purposes, which a lot of that is serving others and glorifying God in the way we interact with each other and those around us in the world. So those were kind of some of the high points I wanted to hit. I don't know what else you think is important to remind ourselves of from the first couple chapters.
Yeah, in some ways I'd say, verse 18 that we got through last time is kind of I think he gets to a place where he says, okay, here is what I've been wanting to say to you. And this next section in verse 19 is a little bit more personal. He says, look, here's my hopes for the future. Here's what's been going on with me. Here's how I've dealt with it, but here's what I hope for. But he's going to bring some people into this discussion, Timothy and Epaphroditus, I think by way of illustration. Because chapter 1, like you said, he says, this is how I've put Christ first and been selfless. Here's how Christ did it in chapter 2. I'm calling upon all of you to do it without grumbling or disputing. Like, make sure you're living the lives you should. But here are some guys that did it right. And I think he's going to illustrate the same principle with them. So
sweet. So great. Let's read it. Philippians 2. I was reading 19 through the end of the chapter, and then you can kind of start highlighting some stuff that we should see here.
all right.
Philippians 2:19. But I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you shortly, so that I also may be encouraged when I learn of your condition. For I have no one else of kindred spirit who will genuinely be concerned for your welfare. For they all seek after their own interests, not those of Christ Jesus. But you know of his proven worth, that he served with me in the furtherance of the gospel like a child with his father. Therefore, I hope to send him immediately as soon as I see how things go with me. And I trust in the Lord that I myself also will be coming shortly. But I thought it necessary to send to you Epaphroditus, my brother and fellow worker and fellow soldier, who is also your messenger and minister to my need. Because he was longing for you all, and he was distressed because you had heard that he was sick. For indeed he was sick to the point of death. God had mercy on him, and not only on him, but also on me, so that I would not have sorrow upon sorrow. Therefore I have sent him all the more eagerly, so that when you see him again, you may rejoice, and I may be less concerned. Receive him then in the Lord with all joy, and hold men like him in high regard, because he came close to death for the work of Christ, risking his life to complete what was deficient in your service to me.
Very good. So I think there's a lot of different things to talk about here. We can talk about Timothy and Epaphroditus and what makes those guys so great. We can talk about what the actual instruction to the Philippians is here. And I just want to go ahead and start with that. At the end of this, in verse 29 and 30, he basically says, I told you about these men so that you will receive them with joy and hold people like this in high esteem.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever we see people who are doing things for the Lord, they really are living their lives that way. And we'll talk about the nuances of what that looks like in people's lives. But those are people to be esteemed. They're not going to bring attention to themselves. God forbids that. Jesus always said that they weren't to do that. But for true servants of God, it's actually a boost when people hold them in esteem and tell them thank you. And he really just instructs them to do this in this section. So I'm looking forward to talking about that. I want to go ahead and start with this observation, though. This gives us some insight into Paul. Paul is not just sitting in prison all happy the whole time. Joy is what he's fighting for. But he mentions sorrow in this text when he talked about God sort of having mercy on him in verse 27,
Yep.
so that he wouldn't have sorrow upon sorrow. That's a confession and an indication that Paul had sadness during this time. There were things that were troubling him, things that were hard. I think he even hints at that in verse 20, when you hear like a note of sadness in his voice, that there weren't more people willing to serve the way Timothy was. And Paul could look around at his situation and still see that there were hard things. And there was real sorrow for him. And I just think that's worth noting, that, this book puts up such a standard for joy that sometimes we feel guilty. I'm not living up to the joy that God has for me because I have sorrow. I see things that are wrong, and there are things that trouble me. Paul had them too, and we see that here. But he's fighting through it. He's working on it. Another thing that I'd say about this, I see Paul's personality here because he's concerned about the Philippians' well-being and willing to part with people that were really special to him. Timothy was really special to him. So to send Timothy away from him was a huge deal. And again, think about it from that period of time. The likelihood of people getting sick and dying, of never seeing them again, travel being so hard and months long, if not, more. To send people away from you might be the last you see of them. So sending Timothy, he doesn't really want to send Epaphroditus back because Epaphroditus has been helpful to him, but he's doing it for the sake of the Philippians and Epaphroditus, it sounds like. But Paul is thinking about other people here, and I love that. Willing to share, the help.
Yeah, it's sort of all the players in this section are doing that. Paul, like you just laid out, is thinking about everybody else. The thing he highlights about Timothy is that he will genuinely be concerned for their welfare. So Timothy, selfless guy. And Timothy even reminds the Philippians, I think at least verse 22 is a reference back to the first time whenever Timothy was with Paul in Philippi, when Paul was arrested. Timothy didn't. It's amazing to me that we don't know what was going on with Timothy. Paul and Silas are in prison in Acts 16, but nothing's said about Luke and Timothy. And were they on the street that night? Were they in Lydia's house? Were they all hunkered down somewhere? I don't know. But what's amazing to me is that young Timothy, perhaps a young teenager, didn't say at that point, you know what, Paul, I'm not sure this is for me. I'm going to go back home. He didn't do that. He stuck it out because he got it. And that's what Paul highlights here. So Paul's thinking about everybody except himself. Timothy is willing to go and willing to leave this man who he thinks of as his father because it would be good for the Philippians for Timothy to go there. Paul, the reason why Paul is concerned, well, I guess Epaphroditus is the other one. I love all the stuff about him, but the fact that he was willing to go, the fact that he was willing to go back, taking a risk because apparently he had almost died coming the first time. So going again, to your point, could have been really dangerous. And the reason why Paul's sending him back and Epaphroditus is willing to go is because Paul understands that the Philippians are concerned about knowing what's going on with Paul, and he's concerned that they're concerned, and so he's sending Epaphroditus. It's just this whole section is a great example of how everybody on some level or another is really oriented toward how can I take care of others? How can I think of the best of others? How can I try to do something for others? It's really pretty tremendous.
Yeah, I agree. I think the people and the attitudes in this text are in some ways rare to find.
Yeah.
That when you find people that are willing to serve like this, putting their life at risk, but also that their constant thought are, hey, those people are concerned about me. Those people are anxious about me. Laura pointed out that in verse 28, Paul even talks about his anxiety or his concern for them. That was another thing troubling him. But isn't it cool to be around people that are like that? It's like, hey, I know you're concerned, so I want to make sure you understand what's happening. And they're hopeful for good communication. That's what actually Paul says in verse 19. He wants to hear how the Philippians are. So add that to Paul's mental state. I don't know what's happening with the Philippians. Last I heard was what Epaphroditus brought me. That's been weeks now, months now. He's been sick here. I've been nursing him back to health, or however this worked, whatever that looked like in his current circumstance.
Yeah.
But I just love when I see Christians who have these kind of attitudes and thoughts about things.
Yeah, this story reminds me of what Paul said in Romans 12:10, where he said, "Be devoted to one another in brotherly love,
Mhm.
outdo one another in showing honor." And this is a pretty good this little summary of what was going on in these relationships. Pretty good summary of that.
Yeah, good. So let's talk about verse 20. When Paul says, I have no one else of kindred spirit who will genuinely be concerned for your welfare. I know there may be a little bit of debate about this, but it sounds like to me that Paul is disappointed
Hmm.
in some of the people around him. That maybe he's looked around and said, hey, who will go be with the Philippians? Who will go encourage them? Who will bring me a report? And it sounds like there were people that were just kind of stepping back from that or not, moving forward with it. And maybe he's just simply saying Timothy has the kind of relationship with the Philippians that nobody else does. But I can't help but read verse 20, um, and know that I've felt like this in the past. Like when you're doing work for God with a family of God in a church, and there are like the couple people who seem to do everything, and they're always in it, and they're always raising their hand. They're usually overwhelmed, they're usually busy, there's usually a lot of things going on with them. I would have to imagine that Timothy was doing a lot even in that time. You've heard the phrase, like, you want to get something done, ask a busy person.
Yeah.
That's a rule in a church, that you kind of know who the people are that have genuine concern for souls, genuine concern for the people that are struggling in the church, and maybe elders or workers like look for people to do it. And sometimes it seems like it's always the same people. Um, on the other side of this, you know, I've been the person that stepped back from a lot of things at times. I know I've disappointed elders or preachers or others that were hoping somebody would help out around with the work that needed to be done. Um, so I think it's a good rebuke, in the letter for all of us. You can go ahead and comment on that.
Yeah. I think you're right. I don't think there's any question about it, especially with verse 21. When you pair it with verse 20, not only are they not really raising their hand, but it wasn't like they were unable. They were actively seeking after their own interests and not those of Christ. So
Yeah.
that's a pretty tough critique. The thing that helps me with this, because it can be, like you said, it can be pretty discouraging. And I feel like I end up having a lot of conversations with people that are really disappointed or frustrated. Um, and like you, I know maybe sometimes at times I felt like it was unfair, but probably more often than not, it's very fair where people have been disappointed or frustrated with me personally. But if I'm on the end of the person who feels like there's not many people stepping up or there's not many people helping me or whatever, it's interesting to me that Paul, he doesn't run away from that fact. He acknowledges it and says it's not good.
Yeah.
But the majority of the section is not about all that. It's not about, man, and let me tell you about the interest they're seeking. They're doing this and they're doing that. He doesn't go into that. He just acknowledges that it's a real problem. But then what he does instead is he elevates, and I have to assume this is something he did within himself so that he didn't get too discouraged.
Yeah.
He tried to pay really close attention. Look at Timothy. This dude gets it. And
Yeah.
look at Epaphroditus. I've always been impressed with the ways that Paul talks about Epaphroditus. To have any one of these distinctions is a pretty great compliment from somebody like Paul. But to be called my brother and fellow worker and fellow soldier and your messenger and minister to my need. I mean, he just covers the whole thing of what you're supposed to be as a Christian, and he wants to make sure to elevate Epaphroditus. So it's obvious to me that Paul spent a lot of time thinking about those who were doing good things,
Yeah.
and not only thinking about them internally, but also speaking about them. And I think that does a couple of things. One, it helps me to avoid getting too bitter toward people who I look around and I don't see them doing as much. Not to say we should never point that out or never should critique that or challenge that. But if I'm not careful, I could become bitter about that, and that's not going to do any good for them or for me or for the Lord or for the lost or anything.
Yeah.
But besides that, he speaks about it to others, so it's not only his own bitterness that he's preventing, but he's also elevating those to what you said earlier. He's elevating those who are doing the good work. Let's not complain about everybody's not here. Let's appreciate the people that are here at the party, and let's enjoy that and acknowledge that. And the more you point people to look at these good things, some people are going to catch on. Maybe even some of those people who used to be pursuing selfish interests, they'll say, you know, I should be more like that. Or at least some of the people who are just sitting on the bench and they're not seeking their own interests or somebody else's, they're going to be more willing to raise their hand whenever they hear and see, yeah, Timothy, that's how I need to be. Epaphroditus, that's how I need to be. I need to have that kind of spirit. So this is, I think, is a helpful passage, especially when we are discouraged with people that aren't stepping up or doing as much as we wish.
Yeah, I love the way you said that. This book being about our wrestling for joy, and when we get to chapter 4, he's going to say, whatever's good, whatever's lovely, dwell on these things. And you can see Paul here he had different things he could dwell on, but he chose to accentuate the positive example, build that up. This is just good leadership anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I have some friends that are teachers. I've had teachers in the past that I saw do this. You could be the kind of teacher that is constantly saying, like, everybody's doing this and nobody's doing their homework, and they're complaining about all that. Or then there's the teachers or the elders or the leaders or the parent, if you have children, who find ways to say, that was a good thing. Look at that example, like elevate that and focus on it and rejoice in it, and have other people look at that and say, well, that's what I want to be too. Christians could probably learn a lot about, what if you made yourself a rule that you weren't going to post anything negative on social media about any politician. All you were going to do for the next couple months was elevate the ones doing it well, and try not to say, and here are all the ways that everybody else is doing it wrong. Like, just think about what that would do for your mindset. Think about what it would do for your community. And so it's a brilliant technique, although he still acknowledges this is a real problem.
Yeah. Because, it does seem like, and we've looked at this, and he's been exhorting them. You guys need to stand firm in the faith. You need to strive together. Don't worry about whatever persecutions or suffering. That's a gift. Like, suffering for the cause of Christ is a gift. And here it seems like he's highlighting, especially Epaphroditus, as somebody who's willing to do that. This man, he saw it as a gift, and I'm rejoicing in him. You should rejoice with me. Look at all this. I like it a lot.
Very good. All right. What else do you see that you want to bring up?
This may be a little, when you read Paul stuff, it's just like, yeah, but that was Paul, and he's this superhuman freak figure. But then I read about Epaphroditus. It's like, okay, I think I could do that. I think I could carry something to somebody and get sick along the way and have somebody take care of me, but I'm just trying to do my best. I could do that. It's just some figures in scripture are so larger than life or kind of inaccessible to us. I really appreciate this section because it brings it makes it really practical and brings it down to earth in some ways. I don't know that we should think about Paul the way we do. I just know that's just how we think about him. He was probably a lot more like us than we think, but it is easy to see him as a superhuman figure. And these guys are just regular guys.
Yeah. Although everybody's journey starts out with one brave journey, right? You wonder about Epaphroditus. I'm curious about him. What was he like, when the church picked him out to go do this job? How old was he? Like, had he done things like this before? Had he ever traveled any further than, where he was from there in Macedonia? Like, I just wonder what his story was. Yeah. But I love that Paul refers to him as my brother in verse 25, my fellow worker and my fellow soldier. He's your messenger and minister to my need. Like whoever this, I'm gonna say maybe a young man, maybe not. I don't know. What did he give up? What did he go without for those months of going to do this on this mission? Did he ever do it again? Or did the fact that he got sick scare him enough that he's like, I'm not going to do that ever again? You ever seen somebody who has a period in their life where they really pour themselves into something or someone? They become evangelistic, they have Bible studies with somebody, but then something goes wrong and their heart gets broken or they get mistreated. And then it's sort of like, step back. Do you ever do it again? And I like to think that Epaphroditus would have, same thing with Timothy. I guess what I'm getting at here is Paul seems so superhuman, But if you seriously spend time thinking about each individual person, in some ways they are too.
Yep.
Like anybody who serves God bravely, and I just think of like moms who raise their kids, and I don't understand all the things that it would be like to go through, like having a life where you serve them and didn't get to do the things that I get to do as a husband and working and all of the things. Just everybody's got their own story, and whoever does it right, like in some ways is more than human, right? I mean, the world's not worthy of people like that.
Yeah. And that's what I don't think these guys would have thought of themselves very highly, and they look more simple, but Paul thought really highly of them. And you kind of brought this up earlier, so I don't know, maybe this would be a good place to talk about it. I do think it's important. You mentioned moms raising godly kids, or people who do easily overlooked simple kinds of things. They need to be acknowledged and elevated. I mean, you and I both know, because we go places or we'll have people reach out to us and they'll just say all kinds of really nice things. And I always appreciate it. It makes me feel weird a lot of times, but I appreciate it and I get it. But then it's like, there's other people that are doing, frankly, I don't know, important or less important is probably bad. I don't know what words to use instead, but they're doing other things that are frankly much more challenging and probably will have greater longer term effects and even short term effects than anything I could ever do, sitting down and having a Bible study with someone or preaching a sermon or whatever. That has value. That's part of God's plan for building up people. But do we spend as much time acknowledging people like moms raising their kids diligently, or people who make financial sacrifices secretly to provide for those who are in need, and all these kinds of things that are easy to overlook? But this is the stuff. Men like Epaphroditus are who we should hold in high regard. People like that is who we should be lifting up. And probably means I should be proactively looking around for who those people are that are doing things, and then elevating them to keep them going and to keep them fueled in their desire to keep serving God in that way.
Yeah, so I completely agree. And I want to talk about this dynamic for a minute, because growing up on the pews, and having different people look at this different ways, I'm just curious what you think, what other people might think about this. My struggle has always been, I think, more the way the devil gets to me is not to say, hey, Andy, you're super important. It's usually the opposite. Like, I'm usually, the voices in my head say what you do doesn't matter. Like, you need to shut your mouth, like all that kind of stuff. So when people say thank you or we appreciate it, and it's fuel to me. It really is. But I get a lot, like we get a lot of that because of what we do. And then there's people that don't. I've seen some Christian cultures, though, that shy away from praising other people or praising each other. And they'll say things. You ever had somebody say this? Well, I don't want to give you a big head, but
Yeah.
And I just want to say to people like that, like, don't worry. Like, I know my failures. Like, I know I know all the ways I'm not good, in some things. I think the Bible makes a distinction here. Jesus always told us not to blow our own trumpets, not to bring attention to ourselves. But one of the ways we can keep people from that temptation is to do it for them.
Yeah.
And you see, like, places like this, like Paul was so good at this. He would say, this person is a great servant. This person helped me so much. And you never hear him say, like, well, I don't want to give him a big head, but look, the way I really do believe the way the devil gets to most people is to tell them that they're not good enough and what they're doing doesn't matter. And I think we help each other when we honor each other, talk about it, praise each other. I suppose I shy away from that with people that are obviously looking for it. Like, hey, did you see what I did? But I think all of us could get better at that.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think I really have a lot to add to that. I think that's absolutely right. And I think it's pretty important. And I like what you said too. It's a way to kind of, because if I feel bad about myself, then that is usually, and we all know this, we see people who are constantly talking about how great they are, but it's obviously a signal that they think they're a loser, and they're trying to convince you so that you don't notice all their problems, or all their perceived problems. So they got to talk about how great they are all the time. But if we elevate the good things that God's doing in each of our lives, then that temptation will be removed to try to present ourselves in an arrogant way. The temptation to despair and worthlessness and all that kind of stuff will also be taken away, because that's, like you said, it's just a gateway for the devil to get in to make us escape in all sorts of sins and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's huge.
So verse 29 again is the instruction in the text. Receive him then in the Lord with all joy. Like, we need to find ways to like make people feel received and joyful. Like, it's so easy, I think, when we greet, and I wonder how things are going to be a little different after all this isolation and stuff is. It's also going to be awkward because we're going to show up and be like, are we allowed to hug? Are you hugging? Are you doing? What do you do? But like, in not manufacturing it. I mean, there are people that you see when they greet, and it reminds me of what Jesus said about the Pharisees. There's a show in it.
Yeah.
But then there's just genuine joy that, like, you're here, you're doing things, you mean something to me. I think the world of you. And I hope that we all just get better and better at doing that in wherever, among the people that we live with.
Yeah. I think that's right. Yeah. It's a beautiful thing. I guess the thing is, I should have thought of this stuff beforehand and I got distracted in my head, but I just thought about pretty much everything that I do and have done and feel emboldened to do. It's because somebody, believed that I could do that, told me that I could do it when I didn't think so, maybe kind of forced me into something that made me feel uncomfortable, told me stuff that I didn't believe was true, and frankly, most of the time still don't believe is true. But hearing him say it was really important. And I can only imagine whenever they showed back up in Philippi and Epaphroditus got up, and maybe he was the one reading the letter, I don't know.
Yeah.
And he reads this letter and that's him, or he's sitting there, in the circle of people and that's amazing.
Yeah.
And that if Paul thought that divine scripture was a good place to place words of honor for people, and this isn't the only place, almost all of his letters have sometimes very lengthy. There's a whole chapter of Romans, this great theological work. They just think, hey, I love all you guys, and you guys are doing great stuff. So I'm belaboring the point, but I'm just thinking how much it's meant to me whenever people have helped me with this. And so I need to do a better job doing it for others as well, and lifting people up.
Yeah. Great. All right, man, we're out of time.
This is fun.
So thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thanks for being a part of it and for commenting. And maybe it just because we're talking about this, but I just want to thank you all for being a part of these discussions. It means a lot to us that a few of you get on here and listen and study along with us and think about these things. Our goal, all of us, I hope, is just to build each other up so that God's people are doing their part wherever they live. And it's really neat to think about all the different places that you are, what you're going through. I know you're praying for us, and I'm praying for you. But it's just a blessing to have you with us.
God bless y'all. We'll look forward to seeing everybody on Monday, Lord willing.